Welcome back to the channel where we remember the stars who once brought magic into our lives, the faces who made us laugh, wonder, and believe in a world just a little more enchanted. Today, we revisit the timeless charm of Bewitched, a show that turned everyday moments into something unforgettable. But while the magic lives on in reruns and memories, many of the beloved actors who made that spellbinding world feel real are no longer with us. Some played the leads we adored, while others appeared briefly but left their mark just the same. In this tribute, we gently honor the lives and final days of the cast of Bewitched who have passed away, remembering not just the roles they played, but the people they were and the legacy they left behind. Today, Agnes Moorehead passed away on April 30th, 1974, after a long and painful battle with cancer, and her death marked the end of one of the most unforgettable talents in television history. She was best known as Endora, the dramatic, powerful, and often mischievous mother in Bewitched, who constantly clashed with her son-in-law Darren while fiercely protecting her daughter Samantha. With her fiery eyeshadow, sweeping robes, and biting one-liners, Endora became one of the most iconic TV characters of all time. And Agnes brought her to life with such depth, style, and control that fans still remember her as the heart of the show. But Agnes's journey started long before that. She was born in Clinton, Massachusetts, raised by a minister father, and first performed in church as a little girl before becoming a true legend of stage, radio, film, and television. She worked with Orson Welles, starred in Citizen Kane, and received 4 Oscar nominations across her career, proving her talent could shine in any medium. Off-screen, she was deeply private, highly educated, and respected by her peers for her professionalism and emotional depth. But sadly, her final years were filled with health struggles. Like several other cast members from the 1956 movie The Conqueror, she believed her cancer came from filming near nuclear test sites in the Utah desert, a tragic and controversial part of Hollywood's past. In her last days, she was admitted to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, where she quietly slipped away at 73. Her death shocked fans around the world, and although she's gone, the memory of her brilliance hasn't faded. Agnes Moorehead wasn't just a supporting actress. She was a force, a presence, and a symbol of strength for women in entertainment. Every time someone rewatches Bewitched and Endora floats into a room with that knowing smile, it's a reminder that Agnes is still with us, in spirit, in magic, and in memory. Alice Ghostley, who passed away on September 21, 2007 at the age of 81, after a long and difficult battle with colon cancer and a series of strokes. Alice was best known and deeply loved for her unforgettable role as Esmeralda, the shy, bumbling witch and housekeeper on Bewitched, who often disappeared when she got nervous and whose clumsy spells created innocent chaos. That role was created just for her after the loss of Aunt Clara's character, and it became one of the warmest parts of the show's later years. Esmeralda wasn't just comic relief. She was gentle, human, and full of heart, much like Alice herself. Born in a train station in Eve, Missouri in 1923, she grew up in Oklahoma and moved to New York with her sister Gladys to follow a dream that began when she was just a little girl reciting poetry and singing at school. She got her big break on Broadway in New Faces of 1952 and later won a Tony Award for the sign in Sidney Brustein's window. Her face became familiar to millions through roles in Designing Women, where she played the wonderfully wacky Bernice Clifton, and guest appearances on shows like Mayberry RFD, Evening Shade, and The Golden Girls. Alice's plain Jane look and trembling voice became her comic trademark, but behind it was a woman who worked tirelessly in both theater and television, bringing sincerity and laughter to every part she played. She also appeared in over 30 films, including To Kill a Mockingbird, Grease, and The Graduate. Though she never had children, Alice was married to actor Felice Orlandi for 50 years, and they remained devoted until his death in 2003. Her ashes now rest beside him and her beloved sister in Arkansas. Off-screen, friends remember her as kind, humble, and never one to seek the spotlight, just someone who loved to perform. Her passing marked the end of an era, leaving behind a legacy of joy, vulnerability, and unforgettable characters that still make us smile today. David Whyte, who died suddenly from a heart attack on November 27, 1990, at the age of 74. It was a heartbreaking end to a life already marked by deep personal tragedy. Just 2 years earlier, in 1988, David had lost his only son, Jonathan Whyte, in the devastating terrorist bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, a grief that never left him. But to millions of viewers around the world, David Whyte will forever be remembered as the fast-talking, high-pressure advertising executive Larry Tate on Bewitched. From the moment he appeared on screen, his character became iconic. The demanding boss who would say anything to please a client, constantly putting pressure on Darren Stevens while remaining oddly likable. Larry Tate represented the slick world of 1960s Madison Avenue, but David gave him real dimension. Funny, nervous, ambitious, and sometimes even human underneath the corporate polish. The character was so beloved that the show's writers named Larry's baby, Jonathan Tate, as a tribute to David's real-life son. Born on April 4, 1916, in Denver, Colorado, David was raised in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, and served honorably in the U.S. Marine Corps during World War II. After the war, he studied acting and launched a career on Broadway in the late 1940s. He made his screen debut in the 1950s and went on to appear in dozens of films and television shows, with credits in classics like The Apartment, Sweet Smell of Success, and Brewster's Millions. He was a regular face on television throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s, with roles in The Twilight Zone, Perry Mason Mission, Impossible, The Rockford Files, Dallas, and even the original The Amazing Spider-Man, where he played newspaper editor J. Jonah Jameson. But despite all his success, David suffered a heartbreaking personal loss in 1958 when his wife, stage actress Mary Welch, died during childbirth. Left to raise his newborn son Jonathan alone, David focused deeply on his family. Tragically, Jonathan's death in the Pan Am disaster broke him in ways no one could fully understand. Friends say David was never the same after losing his son, and though he remained active in small acting roles in public events, the emotional toll was heavy. Just 2 years later, his heart failed, and he quietly passed away in North Hollywood, California. He was laid to rest at Hollywood Forever Cemetery, next to his wife and son. In real life, David Whyte was known as a kind, private man who cared deeply about his family and his craft. While he often played smug or self-centered characters, those who knew him described him as humble, generous, and incredibly devoted. Today, decades later, fans still remember his unforgettable role as Larry Tate, a character that perfectly captured the pressures and absurdities of American corporate life, but always with a glimmer of warmth and comedy that only David White could bring. Alice Pearce, who tragically died on March 3, 1966, at just 48 years old, after a quiet but heartbreaking battle with ovarian cancer, a battle she kept secret from nearly everyone. Alice became a household name as the original Gladys Kravitz on Bewitched, the nosy neighbor whose wide eyes, gasping reactions, and hilarious confusion over the magic happening across the street gave the show some of its funniest and most unforgettable moments. Her performance as Gladys was so iconic that even after her death, no one ever truly replaced her in the hearts of fans. She won a Primetime Emmy Award for that role, but sadly, it came posthumously, and her husband, Paul Davis, had to accept it on her behalf. What most people didn't know was that Alice had already been diagnosed with terminal cancer before Bewitched even began filming. By the time she was delivering those brilliant scenes in the first and second seasons, her health was already fading. Yet, she never let it show. She kept performing, smiling, and delivering perfect comedy, right up until just 2 weeks before she passed away. Born on October 16, 1917, in New York City, Alice was the only child of a prominent banker, and her childhood took her through cities like Brussels, Rome, and Paris. She was incredibly bright and educated, graduating from Sarah Lawrence College in 1940 with a degree in drama. Her big break came when Gene Kelly insisted she reprise her role as Lucy Schmealer, the awkward blind date, in the film version of On the Town. That role launched a career full of sharp, scene-stealing characters. She had her own variety show in 1949, worked with greats like Noel Coward on Broadway, and had a long list of TV and film credits, including The Disorderly Orderly with Jerry Lewis and Kiss Me Stupid. In real life, Alice was thoughtful and soft-spoken, completely different from the zany characters she portrayed. After losing her first husband, composer John Rocks, in 1957, she eventually found love again with Paul Davis, a Broadway stage manager who stood by her side during her final illness. Together, they ran a small art gallery and framing shop in Beverly Hills. When she passed away, the world lost not just a gifted comedienne, but a woman of deep grace, strength, and dedication to her craft. ABC interrupted the prime-time broadcast of Bewitched to announce her death, a moment that showed just how much she had meant to the show and to viewers everywhere. Her final episode, Baby's First Paragraph, aired a week after she died. Alice Pearce was one of a kind. Her look, her voice, her timing, and even though she's gone, the memory of Gladys Kravitz and the magic she brought to the screen will never be forgotten. Dick Sargent, born Richard Stanford Cox on April 19, 1930, in Carmel by the Sea, California, who passed away on July 8, 1994, at the age of 64 after a long and quietly courageous battle with prostate cancer. Best known to millions as the second Darren Stevens on the beloved TV sitcom Bewitched, Dick Sargent brought warmth, charm, and his own unique spin to the role when he stepped in for the ailing Dick York during the show's 6th season in 1969. Ironically, Sargent had originally been offered the role back in 1964, but had to turn it down due to contractual obligations. When fate brought the opportunity back around, he embraced it and played Darren until the show's final episode in 1972, becoming a household face in the process. Behind his easygoing television persona was a man of deep integrity, quiet strength, and surprising complexity. The son of Ruth McNaughton, a silent film actress known as Ruth Powell, and Colonel Elmer Cox, Sargent came from a Hollywood-connected family but forged his own path through Stanford University and early stage work before making his film debut in Prisoner of War in 1954. He went on to appear in dozens of films and TV shows, from Operation Petticoat to The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, Three's Company, and The Waltons. Though not always given headline roles, Sargent's consistent presence on screen made him a dependable and beloved figure in the entertainment industry. Off-screen, he lived a quiet but authentic life. For decades, he kept his sexuality hidden in an industry where being openly gay could cost you everything, going so far as to manufacture a fictional wife for press interviews in his early years. But in 1991, while already facing the spread of prostate cancer, Dick Sargent bravely came out on National Coming Out Day, not for attention, but to help struggling youth. He referred to himself, with both humility and wit, as a retroactive role model, hoping that his openness could save lives. Alongside former co-star Elizabeth Montgomery, who remained a dear friend, he served as Grand Marshal of the 1992 Los Angeles Gay Pride Parade, symbolizing progress and pride at a time when it was still dangerous to do so. Sargent also devoted much of his later years to activism, supporting causes like the Special Olympics, World Hunger Relief, the Christian Children's Fund, and AIDS research, quietly lending his name and heart to help where he could. His longtime partner of 20 years died in 1979 of a cerebral hemorrhage, and later, Sargent found companionship with writer-producer Albert Williams, who stayed by his side until his final days. Though the cancer that took him ultimately couldn't be stopped, it never dimmed his humor, his sense of duty, or his kindness. Elizabeth Montgomery, devastated by his passing, said, "He was a great friend, and I will miss his love, his sense of humor, and his remarkable courage," words that encapsulate what so many felt. Today, as we look back on the cast of Bewitched and those we've lost, we remember Dick Sargent not just for the laughter he brought into our homes, but for the grace, integrity, and courage with which he lived and left this world.